Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. Uh, as many of you know, there has been executive action by President Obama on matters. I'd like to concentrate on a couple of these different matters and the paths that you might take in which to ultimately adjust status. Now, the executive action doesn't deal directly with adjusting status, but there are certain items in there and certain issues that you should be aware of in which to perhaps make a change of path which you are going on. Now, let me just tell you, um, for those people who qualify, let's say you want to do you're married a U.S. citizen, but you cannot adjust status in the U.S. And right now you are left with doing a provisional waiver if you qualify. That's where, normally, let's just say you're here in the U.S. and you've been here illegally for more than a year. Let's say you have no deportation orders, no crimes, no subsequent unlawful entries, no fraud, nothing that makes you inadmissible past the fact you've been here out of status for more than a year. Now, when you take 1 foot outside the U.S., then the 10-year bar, and if you've been out of status more than a year, then it would be the 10-year bar. And in order to get back, you have to have a waiver that basically, when we put it together, when my firm puts it together, it's a whole packet, a legal brief, declarations, affidavits, all kinds of evidence, psychological reports, and so forth that will essentially show that your spouse is going to suffer extreme hardship if you're not allowed back for 10 years. So I just bring this in basically to give you an idea of what it is. I have other videos on the provisional waiver. I also have other videos on consulate processing, adjustment of status, DAPA and DACA with the new executive order set up. I'm going to be discussing so you clearly understand. Now, so given that, minus anything else, the path that someone takes is they would do the provisional waiver here in the U.S. That takes a few months, and assuming it's approved, then you leave, you go back to your home country, and you do the consulate processing. And if they find the marriage is bona fide, if they find the provisional waiver is valid, and if they find you're not inadmissible on any other ground, then you come back as a lawful permanent resident. So a lot of ifs there. I've had, as a matter of fact, I asked the other day where she wanted to know what happens if you don't tell the consulate official basically that you left and came illegally more than once in the U.S., which makes you permanently inadmissible. And I said, well, minus the fraud that occurs, they see 500 people a day, and they'll know for a minute. They'll know in a minute the guy's lying. So in that particular regard, that person wouldn't have qualified, even though they had an approved provisional waiver. They clearly did not disclose that they had left and come back to the U.S. The question is always, well, how are they going to know? But that's not the point, okay? And so, if there were another path that might be able to be taken instead of doing consulate processing with a provisional waiver, you might want to consider it. So what is that other path? Well, this is where the executive action comes in. Now, the executive action has two different forms of relief, which again, they're not the green card. They're basically allow you to stay here legally for a certain period of time. And one's called DACA, which that's been around for a while, but it was expanded with this new executive action. The upper age was eliminated, and other things made it easier to get, basically. And then there's DAPA, and those would be for people who have basically came in at a certain point and then have children that are born in the U.S. So again, I'm just briefly discussing DAPA and DACA. I have much more detailed videos if you would like to view those as well. However, the reason I bring that up is because along with the executive action, there was a memo that was put out by Jed Johnson, the director of the Homeland Secretary of Homeland Security, and essentially it said that if somebody comes back to the U.S. on advanced parole, that they shouldn't be, the 3 to 10 year bar should not be triggered, and that he wants every officer at the port of entries in the United States to adjudicate those equally. Whether that happens or not, I don't know, but at least it's a great beginning. Okay, now I'm throwing a lot of different pieces here so that you'll see where I'm going in a minute. Now, what's advanced parole? Well, advanced parole is really exactly what it says. Well, first of all, parole is when you are permitted into the United States. You don't really have a visa or anything else, but you are permitted by immigration to come into the United States. Advance means you get this permission before you leave. So you're here in the US and you get advance parole. You get permission to come back to the United States, and you have that permission before you walk out of the US. Now, how does this apply? Well, with DACA and DAPA, supposedly you will be able to get advance parole. Okay. And what that does is, let's say you haven't left the United States for 12 years, and you then become you get your DACA work permit or your DAPA work permit. You can then concurrently apply for advanced parole, and let's say you get that. Well, theoretically, and again, I can't sit here and guarantee you that there'll be no problems, because unfortunately you can have the Secretary of Homeland Security issue a memo on what's supposed to be done, and you can have some officer at some point of entry in the middle of nowhere that either is unaware of the memo, doesn't comply with the terms of the memo, or is flat out it's hard to say. But assuming that it is distributed equally and that it is followed, then you come here on DACA or DAPA, and then you get advanced parole. You go to Tijuana for a day, or you go to Vancouver for a day. When you turn around, and even though you have no visa, you have no authorization other than the DAPA or DACA, you do have the advanced parole. You show that to the officer. If you were one of my clients, have a copy of the memo. I would underline the parts that state how it's to be treated, and I would have a letter ready to go on why you're permitted to come back on advanced parole. But assuming it goes smoothly, you show the advanced parole, and then they say, okay, come on in, and now you have legal entry to the U.S. So what does this matter? Well, if you're going to do the marriage petition, which is where this whole video started, and you couldn't adjust status in the U.S., you couldn't do it for various reasons, but one of the biggest reason is you couldn't prove you entered the U.S. legally. Okay, and so now that you have entered on advanced parole through a DACA or DAPA approval, you do have legal entry, and now theoretically you should be able to adjust status in the U.S. to get your green card, to go through the waiver, the provisional waiver, without having to go through consulate processing. So it makes it so that you are able to take each path that you want to take and to do the one that's easier. And because the provisional waiver, albeit is not easy, the provisional waiver does make it so that you do have to show a considerable burden of proof in order to get it approved. Well, a lot of times there's no medical hardship. There's, both people are working or whatever it is. It's hard to show extreme hardship. So if you had a way of being just status without country or without having to go through the waiver process, that would be preferable. So my suggestion is to get a consultation, but if you qualify for DAPA or DACA, get the advanced parole, and then go and on the advanced parole, again, make sure you see, if you're going to do this, make sure you see me or another immigration attorney first to confirm there's no other grounds of inadmissibility and so forth. But then when you come back, you can then file the adjustment of status. So Here we have two paths. One is the Consulate Processing and Provisional Waiver path, and the other is the DACA or DAPA, Advanced Parole and then Adjustment path. It's a fairly good option that has been opened up here. And while nothing is without risks, it's a pretty decent option, I think. So, um, think about what I've said about the different paths. And if you want to go forward, give me a call. I'll give you a free consultation, let you know, what it would take to move forward. Subscribe if you like the video, and we'll go from there. More.